The Arizona sun hung like a brass coin in the bleached sky, beating down on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge. It was the kind of afternoon when sensible folk stayed indoors. But a crowd had gathered near the saloon, drawn by raised voices and the ugly sound of flesh meeting flesh. May Sullivan stood in the center of that circle of onlookers, her thin frame braced for the next blow. At 16, she had the wiry strength that came from endless chores and scarce meals. Her brown hair, meant to be pinned proper, hung loose around her face. A fresh welt bloomed across her cheekbone, joining the yellowed bruises from last week. "You worthless girl." Thomas Sullivan's voice cracked like a whip. The former prospector swayed on his feet, whiskey fumes rolling off him in waves. "Can't even keep house proper. Your mother would spin in her grave." May's jaw tightened at the mention of her mother. Dead these 3 years from fever. She knew better than to answer back. Words only made it worse when he was like this. The crowd shuffled uncomfortably, but nobody moved to help. That was the way of things in Cedar Ridge. Family business stayed family business, even when it spilled onto Main Street for all to see. Thomas grabbed May's arm, fingers digging deep enough to leave marks. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She lifted her head, meeting his bloodshot eyes with a steady gaze that only enraged him further. His free hand rose, and May didn't flinch. She'd learned that flinching made him hit harder, as if her fear fed something dark inside him. The blow never landed. A hand, brown and scarred, caught Thomas's wrist mid-swing. The crowd turned as one to stare at the newcomer who'd appeared silent as smoke. The Apache stood perhaps 6 feet tall, lean-muscled in the way of men who lived by skill rather than brute force. Maybe 30 winters old, maybe less. A thin scar traced the edge of his left temple, disappearing into black hair worn shorter than most Apache but longer than town fashion. He wore a mix of clothing canvas pants, cotton shirt, Apache moccasins marking him as one who moved between worlds. A hunting knife rested at his hip, peace-bonded with a leather cord. "Enough." The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. His voice carried no threat, no anger, just certainty. Thomas jerked his arm, trying to break free. "Get your hands off me, Indian! This ain't your concern." The Apache known in these parts as Samuel Crow, though that wasn't the name his mother gave him, didn't release his grip. His dark eyes moved first to May, taking in the bruises, the defensive hunch of her shoulders, the way she held herself ready to run or fight. Then his gaze shifted to Thomas. "Everything under the sun concerns someone," Samuel said. He released Thomas's wrist with deliberate slowness. "The girl's had enough." "She's my daughter," Thomas spat into the dust. "I'll discipline her as I see fit." "That what you call it?" Samuel's hand moved to rest casual-like on his knife handle, though he made no move to draw it. "Discipline." The crowd had grown. Doc Garrett stood in his doorway, medical bag in hand but feet planted firm on his threshold. Mrs. Henderson from the general store clutched her shawl, lips pressed thin. Even Deputy Marshal Cole had emerged from his office, though he leaned against the post like a man watching a dogfight, interested but not inclined to interfere. Thomas's face had gone the color of brick. "You threatening me, boy?" Samuel smiled then, just a slight lift at the corner of his mouth. "No need for threats." He stepped past Thomas, positioning himself between father and daughter. "The girl's coming with me." The silence stretched tighter than fence wire. May's eyes widened, but she held her tongue. "The hell she is," Thomas snarled. "She is." Samuel reached into his shirt pocket, pulling out a small leather book. "You owe Mickey Patterson $43 at his saloon. Been 6 months coming. I'm willing to clear that debt." Mickey Patterson himself pushed through the crowd, his bartender's apron still tied around his substantial middle. "That true? Sam!" "My word on it." Mickey nodded slow. "Tom, you do owe me considerable." "For the girl," Samuel continued. voice carrying clear across the square. She works my horse ranch until the debt's paid. Fair wage, fair treatment. Better than what she's getting here. Thomas laughed, ugly and sharp. You think you can buy my daughter? I think, Samuel said quietly, that you already sold her. Every time you raised your hand to her, you sold a piece of her spirit for your own satisfaction. I'm offering her work, not ownership. The choice is hers. He turned to May then, and the crowd seemed to lean in. Will you come? May looked at her father, at the gathered townspeople who'd watched her beatings for years, at the Apache man who'd done what none of them would. Her voice came out steady as granite. Yes. You can't. Thomas lunged forward, but Samuel sidestepped neat as a dancer, letting the drunk man stumble past. Deputy, Samuel called out, not taking his eyes off Thomas. The lady's made her choice. She's of age to work where she pleases, by territorial law. Deputy Cole straightened reluctantly. That's technically true. Then we're done here. Samuel began walking toward the edge of town where his horses waited. After a heartbeat, May followed. Thomas tried once more, grabbing for his daughter's arm. This time, Samuel's movement was swift as lightning. The Apache spun, catching Thomas's wrist and twisting just enough to drop the man to his knees in the dust. I said enough. No anger in the words, just finality. You touch her again, ever, and we'll have a different conversation. One that won't involve talking. He released Thomas, who sprawled in the dirt, cursing. Samuel had already turned away, walking steady toward the horses. May hesitated at the edge of the crowd, looking back at the man who'd raised her, who'd broken her mother's heart before fever took her, who'd turned his grief into fists. May, Thomas's voice cracked. You walk away now. You're no daughter of mine. She lifted her chin. I haven't been your daughter for a long time. The crowd parted as she passed. Some of the women looked away. Others, like Mrs. Henderson, met her eyes with something that might have been approval or might have been regret for their own silence. Samuel waited by a paint mare and a bay gelding, checking the saddle straps with practiced efficiency. Up close, May could see details the distance had hidden a turquoise bead woven into one thin braid at his temple, calluses from rope work, a faded cavalry brand on the bay's flank. Can you ride? He asked. Some. The mare's gentle, name's Corn Silk. He handed her the reins, careful not to touch her hands. We've got 15 miles to cover before dark. May looked back once more at Cedar Ridge, at the cluster of buildings that had been her whole world. Her father had struggled to his feet, supported by 2 drinking companions. Deputy Cole was already heading back to his office. Life in the town was resuming its rhythm, as if nothing had changed. Why? She asked suddenly. Samuel finished adjusting his saddle before answering. Why what? Why did you stop him? Why offer this? He mounted his horse with economical grace, then looked down at her. For a moment, his controlled expression shifted, and she saw something raw underneath. Because someone should have, he said simply. Mount up. We're burning daylight. May grabbed the saddle horn and hauled herself onto the mare's back. Her ribs protested another gift from her father's hands, but she bit back the wince. The mare shifted gently beneath her, patient as promised. As they rode out of Cedar Ridge, May didn't look back again. Behind them, the town returned to its business, the dust of their departure settling like nothing had happened at all. But something had changed. In speaking that single word, enough, Samuel Crow had broken a chain that had held her for 16 years. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Ahead lay 15 miles of unknown country and an uncertain future. May Sullivan straightened in her saddle, letting the rhythm of the mare's gait carry her forward, for the first time in 3 years, since her mother's last fevered breath. She felt something that might have been hope, The desert stretched endless before them, and she was riding toward it with a stranger who'd shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than her father had in years. Whatever came next, it had to be better than what lay behind. The shadows had grown long by the time they stopped at a creek bed lined with cottonwoods. Samuel dismounted first, moving to tend the horses without a word. May slid from Cornsilk's back, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. Every muscle ached, but she wouldn't complain. Complaints had never helped before. "There's jerky in the saddlebag," Samuel said, not looking up from loosening the bay's girth. "We'll make camp here tonight." May found the dried meat, tough as leather but welcome after the day's events. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's supper. Her father had been in one of his moods this morning, and breakfast had been forgotten in the chaos. Samuel built a small fire with practiced efficiency, arranging stones in a circle and coaxing flames from dry grass and twigs. He worked in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, dangerous quiet she knew from her father. This was just absence of words. When the coffee pot was on the fire, he finally spoke. "That deputy back there, Cole, he knew what was happening to you." It wasn't a question, but May answered anyway. "Everyone knew." "And did nothing?" "It's not their way." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small by the fire. "Father wasn't always like this. After Mother died..." She trailed off. Samuel poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing her one. The metal burned her fingers, but the warmth was welcome as the desert night cooled. "Loss changes men. Sometimes it reveals what was always there." He pulled something from his pack, a coil of rope, and began stretching it between 2 scraggly mesquite trees about 10 feet from the fire. May watched, confused, until he stepped back and gestured to the space beyond the rope. "Your side," he said simply. "This rope marks the boundary. I won't cross it without your permission. You have my word." May stared at the rope, then at him. "Why?" "Because trust is earned, not taken." He moved to his own bedroll on the far side of the fire. "There's a clean shirt in the pack by the mare. It'll swim on you, but it's better than what you're wearing." She fingered the torn sleeve of her dress where her father had grabbed her. The fabric was stiff with old sweat and fear. "You'll..." "I'll be checking the horses." He stood, taking his coffee with him. "Call out when you're done." He disappeared into the darkness beyond the firelight. May quickly found the shirt soft flannel, worn thin from washing and changed with one eye on the shadows. The shirt fell nearly to her knees, but it smelled of soap and wood smoke instead of whiskey and anger. "Done?" she called softly. Samuel returned, settling back onto his bedroll without commenting on her changed appearance. He pulled out a piece of harness and began working oil into the leather with sure strokes. "The ranch," May ventured. "How far?" "Another day's ride. It's not much, couple dozen horses. A cabin, some outbuildings. I run it with an old cavalry friend, Jim Washington. He's in Tucson right now, selling some yearling. And I'll be working off Father's debt." Samuel's hand stilled on the leather. "You'll be working for wages, $1 a day plus board. The debt's between your father and me now." "But you said..." "I said what needed saying to get you out of there." His dark eyes met hers across the fire. "You don't owe me anything. May Sullivan. The work's real horses need tending. Fences need mending. Books need keeping if you can read and figure." "I can read some. Mother taught me before..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "That's good. Jim can't read at all, and my writing's rough." He returned to his leather work. "You're free to leave whenever you choose. I'll even give you a horse when you go, if you've earned it fair." May studied him in the firelight. The scar on his temple caught the shadows, and she wondered about its story. "What you said back there, about someone having to do something, was that really why?" Samuel set down the harness, considering his words. "When I was young, maybe 12 winters, the cavalry came to our camp. My mother tried to protect my sister." His voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped his coffee cup. "No one stopped them. Not the other soldiers. Not the Apache scouts riding with them. Everyone had their reasons, orders. Fear, survival. The fire popped, sending sparks into the darkness. Later, I became a scout myself, needed the money, needed to eat. But I promised myself when I saw someone defenseless being hurt, I wouldn't look away, wouldn't make excuses. He met her eyes again. Today, I kept that promise. May felt her throat tighten. Your sister. Gone. The fever took her that winter, but she was already broken inside. He stood abruptly, tossing the coffee grounds into the fire. Get some rest. We ride at first light. She curled up in the blanket he'd left for her, positioned carefully on her side of the rope boundary. Despite everything, the aches, the strangeness, the uncertainty of tomorrow, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safety. This man, this Apache who the town feared and whispered about, had drawn a line in the dirt and said, enough. More than that, he'd drawn a line of rope and said, you're safe here. Samuel, she called softly. A grunt of acknowledgement from the darkness. Thank you. No need for thanks. Just make it worth something. Make what worth something? The choice to walk away, make it count. She lay quiet after that, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Behind them, Cedar Ridge was probably deep in its evening routines, her father drinking at Patterson's saloon, the good women closing their shutters against the night, Deputy Cole making his rounds while carefully avoiding any real trouble. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound should have frightened her, but it didn't. Those coyotes were just living their nature, honest in their wildness. It was the civilized cruelty of Cedar Ridge that had nearly killed her spirit. Was Samuel Crow your cavalry name? She asked suddenly. A long pause. Then, Samuel Two Crows. They couldn't pronounce my real name. Didn't care to try. What is your real name? Another pause. Longer this time. Dasodahe means he stands firm. Dasodahe, she repeated carefully. Samuel's fine, he said, but she heard something in his voice surprise. Maybe that she'd tried. The fire burned lower, and May's eyes grew heavy. For the first time in memory, she fell asleep without fear of what morning would bring, across the dying fire. Samuel sat up a while longer, rifle across his knees, watching the desert and listening to the night sounds. When a rider passed on the distant road, probably a vaquero heading home late, Samuel tracked the hoofbeats until they faded. May never stirred. She slept like someone who'd been holding their breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. Near dawn, she woke briefly to find he'd built up the fire again and moved his bedroll closer to where the rope line met the mesquite tree still on his side, but positioned between her and any approach from the road, guardian and stranger both, keeping watch while maintaining the distance that let her breathe. She pulled the blanket higher and let sleep take her again. Tomorrow would bring the ranch, this Jim Washington, and whatever work a horse operation needed from a town girl with broken ribs and calloused hands. But tonight, for these few hours between her old life and the unknown new one, she was neither Thomas Sullivan's daughter nor anyone's property. She was just May, sleeping under stars by a dying fire, with a rope marking a boundary that no one would cross without her say-so. It was the first gift anyone had given her in 3 years, not rescue, not ownership, but the simple respect of distance. The ranch sat in a valley between two low ridges, sheltered from the worst of the desert wind. It wasn't much to look at. A cabin of adobe and rough timber, a barn that leaned slightly north, several corrals made from twisted mesquite and juniper posts. But the grass grew decent here, fed by an underground spring, and the horses grazing in the near pasture looked healthy and well-fed. Home, Samuel said simply, dismounting near the barn. May slid from Corn Silk's back, her body protesting every movement. The second day's ride had been harder than the first, her muscles screaming with each mile. But she'd kept silent, eyes fixed on the horizon, determined not to show weakness. A dog emerged from the barn, a yellow mongrel with one torn ear, and approached with tail wagging cautiously. It sniffed at May's extended hand before deciding she passed muster. "That's Patch," Samuel said, already working on unsaddling the horses. "Jim found him half dead on the road last spring. Now he thinks he owns the place." May helped with the horses, though her movements were clumsy from inexperience. Samuel corrected her grip on the brush without comment, showing rather than telling. The bay stood patient while she worked the dust from his coat, and she found the repetitive motion soothing. "You'll sleep in the cabin," Samuel said, hanging the saddles on their pegs. "Jim and I use the loft in the barn when we're both here. Gives everybody breathing room." The cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a cook stove, table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Shelves held tin plates, cups, a few books, and supplies. A Mexican blanket hung over the single window, faded but cheerful in its reds and yellows. "Was this Jim's place first?" May asked, running her finger along the smooth, worn table edge. "We built it together, after the army." Samuel set her small bundle of belongings, just the spare clothes he'd given her, on the bed. "Jim saved my life at Fort Bowie. Cavalry horse went crazy. Had me pinned. Jim pulled me clear. Took a kick to the shoulder that still pains him in the rain. And you became partners." "Eventually. Took us both time to figure out we didn't fit in the places we came from anymore." He moved to the stove, checking the wood supply. "I'll show you the chores come morning. Tonight, you rest." "I can work. You can barely stand straight." His voice held no judgment, just fact. "Healing's not weakness. May, it's necessary." He left her then, heading to the barn. May sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. The silence here was different from town, not the held breath quiet before violence, but something vast and patient. Through the window, she could see Samuel moving among the horses in the corral, checking hooves and running his hands along their legs. She meant to just lie down for a moment, but sleep took her hard and fast. She woke to darkness and the sound of her own screaming. The door burst open, and Samuel stood silhouetted against stars, rifle in hand. His eyes swept the room, checking corners and shadows, before settling on her. May sat bolt upright in the bed, sweat-soaked and shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Just a dream," she managed. He lowered the rifle but didn't leave. Instead, he lit the lantern on the table, filling the room with warm yellow light. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head, then reconsidered. "It's always the same. I'm trying to run, but my feet won't move. And he's coming, and I can smell the whiskey, and—" She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. Samuel pulled out one of the chairs and sat, giving her space but staying present. "After Fort Bowie, I had dreams too. Jim would wake me, say I was fighting enemies that weren't there. Did they stop? Eventually, when my body finally believed it was safe." He stood, moving to the stove. "I'll make coffee. It's the middle of the night." "So it is." He built up the fire anyway, setting water to boil. "There's an Apache remedy my grandmother used. Says you have to tell the dream to the first light of dawn. Let the sun carry it away." "Does it work?" "Sometimes. Sometimes you just have to wait it out, like a fever breaking." He measured coffee into the pot with careful precision. "But the telling helps, makes it smaller somehow." They sat at the table as the coffee brewed, not talking, just being awake together in the quiet darkness. May noticed things in the lantern light, how Samuel's hands were steady despite the late hour, how he'd taken time to put on his boots before running to her aid, how the rifle now leaned against the wall within easy reach but not threatening. "Were you watching the cabin?" she asked. "I sleep light, old habit." "From the army?" "From before that, from being Apache in a world that's forgotten what that means." He poured the coffee, strong and black. "My people believe the owl calls to warn of danger. Tonight, I heard you instead. May wrapped her hands around the hot cup, letting the warmth seep into her bones. I'm keeping you from sleep. Sleep's overrated. Besides, the horses need checking before dawn anyway. Why did you really leave the cavalry? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. They wanted me to track a band of Apache, my mother's cousins, though the army didn't know that. I was supposed to lead soldiers to their winter camp. Did you? I led them in circles for 3 weeks until the Apache had time to move on. The lieutenant figured it out eventually, would have court-martialed me, but Jim convinced him I'd just lost the trail. His smile was bitter. They believed a black man's word that an Apache had failed at tracking. The insult saved my life. And Jim left with you. 6 months later, said he was tired of taking orders from men who'd never seen a fair fight. Samuel refilled their cups. We pooled our discharge pay, bought a few horses and started building. It's not much, but it's ours. It's peaceful, May said. I'd forgotten what that felt like. You'll remember. Give it time. Through the window, the sky was starting to lighten, just a hint of gray at the eastern edge. Samuel noticed too. Come on, he said, standing. If we're awake, might as well meet the dawn properly. They sat on the cabin's narrow porch, watching the desert come alive with color purple to pink to gold. The mountains caught the first light like they were made of copper. A hawk circled high above, riding the early thermals. Tell it now, Samuel said quietly. Tell the dream to the sun. May felt foolish, but his steady presence gave her courage. She spoke to the brightening sky about running but not moving, about the smell of whiskey and the sound of boots on wooden floors, about hands that grabbed and held and hurt. The words came out jumbled and raw, but Samuel just listened, letting her speak until there was nothing left. The sun cleared the ridge, full and warm on her face. It's smaller now, she said, surprised. It'll come back, but each time you tell it, each sunrise you meet, it loses power. He stood, stretching. Breakfast, then I'll show you the work. Nothing too heavy until those ribs heal proper. How did you? Way you hold yourself. Seen enough injuries to recognize the signs. He headed inside. There's liniment in the barn, horse medicine, but it works on people too. The day passed in a blur of new tasks. Samuel showed her how to measure feed, how to check water troughs, how to spot signs of lameness or illness in the horses. His teaching was patient, hands guiding hers when she struggled with a latching mechanism or the proper way to approach a skittish mare. Never come at them straight on, he demonstrated, sliding toward a young paint at an angle. Predators approach direct. Come from the side. Let them see you're no threat. It was advice about horses. But May heard the deeper lesson. Everything here seemed to carry that double-meaning, practical wisdom that also spoke to older, harder truths. By evening, she was exhausted, but in a different way than before. This was tired from work, not from fear. Her body ached from use, not abuse. When Samuel handed her a plate of beans and cornbread, she ate with genuine hunger rather than forcing food past a clenched throat. Jim should be back tomorrow, Samuel said as they cleaned the dishes. He's loud but good-hearted, tells stories that are half lies but entertaining ones. Will he mind me being here? Jim, he'd take in every stray between here and Mexico if I let him. He'll probably mother you worse than an old hen. That night, May slept without dreams. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the liniment Samuel had left by her door. Or maybe it was knowing that someone sat in the barn loft, sleeping light, listening for owls and other warnings in the darkness. The desert sang its night songs coyotes, wind through the ridges, the soft nickering of horses, and May Sullivan began to believe she might survive after all. Jim Washington arrived with the noon sun, riding in on a dust cloud and hollering from half a mile out. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and dark-skinned, with gray creeping into his close-cropped hair and a smile that split his face wide. "Sam, you lazy Apache, where you at?" He swung down from his horse with surprising grace for his size. "Sold every last yearling in Tucson for top dollar." He stopped short when he saw May by the water trough, his eyes taking in her fading bruises and too thin frame, but his smile never wavered. "Well now, Sam didn't mention we had company." He swept off his hat. "Jim Washington, miss. You must be somebody special if Sam let you near his precious horses." "May Sullivan," she said quietly. "I work here now." Jim's eyes flicked to Samuel, who'd emerged from the barn. Some silent communication passed between the two men, years of partnership condensed into a single look. "About time we got some help around here," Jim said easily. "Sam's cooking could kill a man faster than any bullet. You cook, Miss May." "Then you're already worth your weight in gold." He led his horse toward the barn, talking steady as a river. "This one time, Sam tried to make biscuits. I swear to God, they came out so hard we used them to plug holes in the barn wall. Still there, far as I know." Despite herself, May felt her lips twitch toward a smile. The days fell into rhythm. Morning chores before the heat grew fierce. Afternoon work in whatever shade they could find. Evening tending as the sun dropped low. Jim's presence changed the ranch's quiet. He hummed while he worked, told stories over dinner, filled the spaces with easy warmth. "You ever hear about the time Sam here outsmarted an entire cavalry unit?" Jim asked one evening, whittling a piece of juniper. "They wanted him to find water in the worst drought anyone had seen. Sam leads them right to this alkali flat. Starts digging. Course, he knew there wasn't nothing there but salt and spite." Samuel shook his head but didn't interrupt. "Meanwhile," Jim continued, "he'd already told the Apache where the real water was, 2 valleys over. By the time the lieutenant figured it out, the band had filled their water bags and moved on." He laughed, deep and rich. Lieutenant was so mad he couldn't see straight, but what could he say? Sam found water, just not the kind anybody could drink. May found herself drawn into their partnership, the way they moved around each other with practiced ease. Jim would start a task, Sam would finish it. Sam would gesture toward a problem. Jim would already be reaching for the right tool. They spoke in half-sentences and comfortable silences. "How'd you learn horses?" May asked Sam one morning as they worked a young stallion in the round pen. "My grandfather, he said horses were honest. They'd tell you what they thought if you knew how to listen." He watched the stallion's ears, reading some message there. "Army taught me different methods, but grandfather's way was better." "Teach me." He studied her for a moment. "Watch his shoulder. See how it tightens before he changes direction. That's him thinking. If you can read the thought, you can guide it." She spent hours learning to read the horse's silent language, the flick of an ear, the shift of weight, the way they breathed. Samuel taught with patience, correcting without scolding. When she finally got a nervous mare to accept a halter without forcing it, his nod of approval meant more than any words. Jim taught her too, but differently. He showed her how to mend tack with waxed thread, how to mix liniment from plants that grew wild in the hills, how to keep books in his simple system of marks and numbers. "Never learned letters proper," he admitted without shame. "But numbers, those I understand. Sam does the writing when we need it." "I could teach you," May offered one evening. "Reading, if you wanted." Jim's face lit up. "You'd do that." So evenings became teaching time. May scratched letters in the dirt, showing Jim how they built into words. Samuel watched from his seat on the porch, whittling or working leather, occasionally offering a word when Jim struggled. 2 weeks in, May woke without nightmares for the 3rd night running. Her ribs had shifted from sharp pain to dull ache. Her hands, already calloused from years of hard work, adapted to the ranch's different demands. "You're getting stronger," Samuel observed as she hefted a full water bucket without wincing. "I was always strong," she corrected. "Just tired of being careful." He considered that. Careful's not wrong. But there's a difference between careful and scared. Which was I. Both. Now you're learning the difference. Mrs. Valdez arrived one afternoon with her daughter Rosa, their wagon loaded with corn and beans to trade for horsehair. Samuel handled the negotiation in a mix of Spanish and Apache while May helped Rosa unload. "You're the girl from Cedar Ridge," Rosa said quietly. "The one whose father—" "Yes." Rosa touched May's arm gently. "Good you got away. My husband was like that. Before he died, the bottle makes devils of some men." After they left, May found Samuel checking hooves in the far corral. "People know about me. People always know. Question is what they do with the knowing." He picked a stone from the horse's hoof. "Mrs. Valdez lost her eldest son to a drunk with a gun. She understands choosing to leave." A week later, Marcus Freeman stopped by a black freedman who ran cattle on the other side of the ridge. He and Jim sat on the porch, passing a bottle of something that wasn't whiskey while they talked prices and weather. "Your new hand's settling in good," Marcus observed, watching May work with a yearling. "She's got the touch." Jim agreed. Horses trust her. "Takes a special kind of person to earn a horse's trust after people have broken theirs." May heard the layers in that statement but kept working, gentling the yearling with steady hands and quiet words. One morning, she found Samuel teaching the paint colt Apache words simple commands, but in his native tongue. "Why both languages?" she asked. "Because he might need both someday. Never know who'll ride him or where he'll go." He showed her the hand signal that went with the word for stop. "Want to learn?" She nodded, and he taught her 5 words that morning: stop, go, easy, good, and home. Her pronunciation made him almost smile, but he corrected her gently until she got the tones right. "You said your mother's cousins," May ventured as they walked back. "Are they still—" "Alive some. Most are on the reservation now. San Carlos." His jaw tightened. "Government calls it their home. It's not. It's where they were put." "Do you visit?" "Sometimes. Not often. It's hard, seeing warriors made to farm land that won't grow. Watching children forget what the mountains mean." He stopped walking. "That's why I stayed out here, at least here. I can remember who we were." That evening, Jim made rabbit stew while May practiced writing in the ledger Samuel had given her. Her letters were still crude, but she recorded each horse's feeding, noted a slight lameness in the bay, added figures for the week's expenses. "You're a natural bookkeeper," Jim said, looking over her shoulder. "Sam, we should give her a raise." "She's already getting $1 a day plus board." $1.25. Then she's doing work worth 2 men. Samuel looked at May. $1.25. But you take on teaching Jim regular and help with the correspondence when needed." "Deal." She offered her hand to shake, and he took it brief but firm. The first time they deliberately touched since that day in Cedar Ridge. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the desert settle into sleep, May thought about the Apache word for home that Samuel had taught her. It didn't translate exactly. He'd explained it meant something more like the place where you can breathe. 3 weeks ago, she'd been property and all but law. Now she was May, who worked with horses, who could make Jim laugh with her attempts at Apache pronunciation, who Samuel trusted with the yearlings. She was earning money, her own money, for the first time in her life. She touched her ribs, still tender but healing. Everything was still tender but healing. Tomorrow, Samuel had promised to teach her to ride properly, not just stay on, but truly ride. Jim would need help with a new corral they were planning. There would be coffee at dawn and stories at dusk and honest work between. May Sullivan was learning the difference between careful and scared, between surviving and living. In this valley between ridges, with 2 men who'd made their own definition of family, she was finally starting to breathe. The trouble came on a Tuesday, 5 weeks after May had left Cedar Ridge. She saw the dust cloud first, rising from the valley's mouth while she was fixing the gate on the eastern corral. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving with purpose. not the easy pace of neighbors visiting. "Sam," she called, keeping her voice level. He emerged from the barn, took one look at the approaching riders, and his expression hardened. "Get inside." "No." The word came out firmer than she'd intended. "If it's about me, I should face it." Jim appeared around the corner, rifle casual in his hands. "Company." "Looks like—" They waited as the riders drew closer. May recognized Deputy Cole first, his badge catching the morning sun. Behind him rode Thomas Sullivan, and with them came Garrett Henderson, the general store owner's eldest son, a man who'd always looked at May like she was goods on a shelf. The fourth rider she didn't know, a thin man in a dark suit despite the heat, carrying a leather document case. "Samuel Crow," Deputy Cole called out, reining up just outside the yard. "Mr. Sullivan here has some legal matters to discuss." "Then he can discuss them from right there," Samuel said evenly. Thomas Sullivan's eyes found May, and his face flushed dark. "Get over here, girl. You're coming home." "No." May stepped forward, but stayed between Samuel and Jim. "I'm not—" The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Clarence Bridger, attorney at law. Your father has secured a writ of guardianship. As you're not yet 18, you're legally bound to return to his custody." He produced a paper with an official-looking seal. Samuel didn't move to take it. "She's working off a debt," Samuel said. "Legal employment." "Under duress," Bridger countered. "Mr. Sullivan never agreed to this arrangement. You took his daughter without proper authority." "I left willingly." May said, "You're a minor," the lawyer replied, not even looking at her. "Your wishes are irrelevant." Garrett Henderson spoke up then, his voice oily with false concern. "Besides, everyone knows what happens to white girls living with Apache and colored men. It ain't proper, ain't Christian." Jim's grip shifted on his rifle, but he kept it pointed at the ground. "What's your interest in this, Henderson?" Samuel asked quietly. Garrett smiled, ugly and knowing. "Just looking out for the girl's welfare. Her daddy and I have an understanding. Once she's home where she belongs, well, I might be willing to help with their financial troubles, in exchange for certain considerations." The meaning was clear as water. May's stomach turned. "You're selling me," she stared at her father. "After everything, you're actually selling me." Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's not like that. Garrett's offering marriage. Proper marriage. Better than whatever this is." He gestured at the ranch with disgust. "I'd rather die," May said flatly. "You don't get a choice," Bridger interrupted. "Deputy, do your duty." Cole shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, everybody stay calm. Sam, you know I've got to enforce the law." "Whose law?" Samuel asked. "The one that says a father can beat his daughter bloody, the one that lets him sell her to pay his debts, or maybe the law that says an Apache isn't really a person, so nothing I do counts anyway." "Don't make this difficult," Cole warned. "I'm not making anything. I'm standing on my own land, with my partner and our employee. You're the ones bringing difficulty." Bridger pulled out another paper. "This is a warrant for your arrest. Mr. Crow. Kidnapping and corrupting a minor. Deputy Cole is authorized to bring you in if you don't release the girl immediately." Jim laughed, harsh and bitter. "Corrupting Sam's shown that girl more decency in 5 weeks than her daddy did in 16 years. "Nobody asked you, boy." Garrett spat. The word hung in the air like a lit fuse. Jim's rifle started to rise, but Samuel touched his arm lightly. Mr. Bridger," Samuel said, his voice carrying that same calm certainty from the day in Cedar Ridge. "How much did Thomas Sullivan pay you for those papers?" "That's not relevant." "Because I'm wondering if he mentioned that he already sold his daughter's labor to me, witnessed by Mickey Patterson and half of Cedar Ridge." Samuel pulled out his own paper, the saloon's debt ledger. $43. May's working it off at $1.25 per day. Legal wages for legal work. That arrangement was made under duress, Bridger argued. Really, because I recall Thomas agreeing quite readily. Ask anyone who was there. Deputy Cole rubbed his face. This is getting complicated. It's not complicated at all, May said, stepping fully into the open. Deputy Cole, you've known me since I was small. You've seen what my father does when he drinks. You saw it that day in the street, and you saw it plenty of times before. Cole couldn't meet her eyes. I'm safe here, she continued. I'm earning honest wages, learning honest work. Sam and Jim have never laid a hand on me except to teach me how to tend horses. They gave me a door I can lock, food I don't have to fear eating, and work that makes me useful instead of afraid. Pretty words, Garrett said. But they don't change the law. You're coming back, one way or another. Over my dead body, Samuel said quietly. That can be arranged. Indian. The moment stretched taut. May could feel the violence brewing like a thunderstorm. Jim's finger rested on his rifle's trigger guard. Samuel stood perfectly still, but she'd seen him stand that same way before working with dangerous horses coiled and ready. Wait, she said suddenly. Mr. Bridger, you say the law requires me to return to my father's custody. That's correct. And this guardianship lasts until I'm 18. Yes. When do I turn 18? Bridger looked confused. Well, I'd have to check the records. October 15th, May said clearly. 5 months from now. 5 months. Gentlemen, that's all. Surely my father can manage 5 more months without beating someone. And Mr. Henderson, if you're so eager to marry me, you can court me proper when I'm of age. Unless you're only interested if I come beaten down and desperate. Garrett's face darkened. You watch your tongue, girl. Or what you'll hit me too. May looked at each man in turn. Is that what you all want, to drag me back so you can take turns breaking me? Because that's what this is really about. Isn't it not law, not propriety, not Christian values? You just can't stand that I got away. Thomas finally found his voice. You're my daughter. You belong with me. I belonged with you when Mother was dying. Where were you then, in Patterson's saloon? I belonged with you when I was trying to keep us fed on nothing. Where were you, face down in a bottle? Her voice rose. The only time you remembered I existed was when you needed something to hit. Enough of this, Bridger said. Deputy, arrest Mr. Crow. Cole sighed heavily and started to dismount. I wouldn't, Jim said conversationally. His rifle now definitely pointed in the deputy's general direction. See, you might have papers, but we've got friends too. Marcus Freeman's ranch is just over that ridge. The Valdez family lives 2 miles north. Even old Chen from the railroad camp stops by regular. You arrest Sam, and you'll have to explain to all of them why you're destroying the only horse ranch that deals fair with everybody, regardless of color. You threatening me? Cole asked. Stating facts, just like it's a fact that Sam's the only one who knows where the wild horse herds water in drought season. Be a shame if that knowledge went to jail with him. Samuel hadn't moved, still watching the men with that perfect stillness. But May saw something shift in Deputy Cole's expression calculation, replacing certainty. Mr. Sullivan, Cole said slowly, maybe we should reconsider. The girl's working, earning wages. She's not being harmed. Maybe we let this play out until she's of age. No, Thomas's face went purple. She's mine. She's nobody's, Samuel said, speaking for the first time in minutes. That's what you can't stomach. She chose to leave. She chose to stay. And every day she keeps choosing. That's what really burns you, that she had a choice at all. The law, Bridger started. The law is what men with power say it is. Samuel cut him off. Today you have the power, but power shifts. Mr. Bridger, and memories are long out here. The threat was subtle but clear. Deputy Cole made his decision. I'm not arresting anyone today, he announced. This is a civil matter. Take it to a real judge if you want, but I'm not dragging a girl from a safe situation to satisfy anybody's pride." "You can't," Garrett began. "I can and I am." Cole turned his horse. "Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you go home. May, you want to stay here?" "Yes." "Then that's that, far as I'm concerned." Bridger spluttered about lawsuits and consequences, but Cole was already riding away. After a moment of indecision, the lawyer followed. That left Thomas and Garrett facing the three of them. "This isn't over," Thomas said. "It is," May replied. "Go home, Father. Drink yourself into forgetting you ever had a daughter. It's what you're best at." Thomas raised his hand as if to strike her from horseback, but found himself looking down the barrel of Samuel's pistol drawn so fast May hadn't seen the movement. "Remember what I said in town?" Samuel asked softly. "About what would happen if you touched her again." Thomas wheeled his horse around and galloped away. Garrett lingered a moment longer. "You've made an enemy, girl." "Good," May said. "I'd hate to have you as a friend." After they'd gone, the dust settling in their wake, May found herself shaking. Jim put a steadying hand on her shoulder while Samuel holstered his weapon. "They'll be back," Jim said. "Let them come." Samuel replied, "We'll be ready." The sandstorm hit 3 days later, just as they were moving the herd to the eastern pasture. May saw it coming, a brown wall eating the horizon, turning the noon sky to dirty brass. The horses sensed it too, ears flat, nostrils flaring at the electric tang in the air. "Get them to the canyon," Samuel shouted over the rising wind. "The walls will give shelter." They worked the edges of the herd, pushing 30 head toward the narrow canyon a quarter-mile north. Jim rode point while Samuel took the left flank. May had the right, fighting to keep the young ones from scattering. The storm hit when they were halfway there. The world disappeared. Sand blasted exposed skin like ground glass, filled eyes and nose and mouth. May pulled her bandana up, squinted through the brown hell, and kept corn silk moving by feel more than sight. The mare knew her job, cutting and weaving to keep the horses bunched. A yearling broke right, panicked and running blind. May wheeled after it, leaning low over corn silk's neck. She couldn't see 5 feet ahead, navigating by the sound of hooves and the terrified whinny of the young horse. The rope was in her hand before she thought about it. Samuel's teaching made instinct. The loop sailed through the sandstorm and caught clean. She dallied around the saddle horn and turned corn silk back toward where she hoped the herd was. That's when she heard Samuel yell. The sound cut through the storm's howl, pain and warning mixed. May pulled the yearling toward the sound, finding shapes in the brown chaos. Samuel was on the ground, his horse dancing nervously nearby. A spooked stallion had knocked him down and was rearing, hooves flashing. May didn't think. She drove corn silk between Samuel and the stallion, using the mare's body as a shield. The stallion's hooves came down on her leg instead of Samuel's skull. Pain shot white-hot through her calf, but she held position, swinging her rope to drive the stallion back. "Can you ride?" she shouted. Samuel was already pulling himself up, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Get to the canyon." She helped him catch his horse's reins, making sure he was mounted before turning back to the herd. Jim's voice carried through the storm, calling directions, keeping the horses moving. Together, they pushed the last of them into the canyon's shelter. The narrow walls cut the wind to a tolerable roar. The horses milled nervously but stayed bunched, their bodies creating warmth and stability. Jim appeared like a ghost from the brown haze, his face caked with dirt except where his eyes had squinted shut. "Everyone whole," he called. "Sam's hurt," May said. "Cut on his head." "I'm fine," Samuel insisted, though he swayed in the saddle. Like hell. Jim was already moving, pulling Samuel down from his horse. "May, there's a medical kit in my saddlebag." She found it, hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Her leg throbbed where the stallion had struck, but she could stand on it. That had to be enough for now. Jim cleaned Samuel's wound with water from his canteen. Precious in the storm, but necessary. The cut was deep but clean, running from temple to eyebrow. "Needs stitching," Jim said.
"Later?"
Samuel's eyes found May.
"Your leg."
"It's nothing." "It's not nothing. I saw that stallion come down on you." Jim looked between them. "Both of you are hurt." "We're both standing," May said firmly. "The horses need tending first." They worked through the storm's fury, checking each animal, looking for injuries. The yearling May had roped had scraped its legs raw. An older mare had a gash on her flank. They treated what they could with the supplies they had, waiting for the storm to pass. It lasted 2 hours that felt like 2 days. When the wind finally died and the air cleared, they emerged from the canyon covered head to toe in dust, looking like clay figures come to life. "The ranch," Jim said quietly. They could see it from the canyon mouth. The barn's roof was half gone, torn away by the wind. Debris scattered across the valley fence posts, feed buckets, a chair from the cabin's porch. They rode back slowly. Samuel listing in his saddle despite his protests. The cabin had survived mostly intact, though sand had forced through every crack and gap. The barn was worse, the missing roof letting sand pile against the walls like snow. "Months of work," Jim said, surveying the damage. "We'll rebuild." Samuel said. His words slurred slightly. May recognized the signs of a head injury. "First, we get you inside," she said, taking charge in a way that surprised all 3 of them. "Jim, help me with him." They got Samuel into the cabin, onto the bed May had been using. She didn't argue, just started cleaning his wound properly while Jim heated water. "The needle's in the tin box," Samuel said, his eyes struggling to focus. May had sewn plenty fabric, leather, her own skin once when her father had pushed her into the stove. But this was different. This was Samuel, who'd stood between her and harm, who'd taught her to read horses and speak Apache words. "I can do it," Jim said gently. "No." May threaded the needle with steady hands. "I've got it." She made 7 careful stitches while Samuel gripped the bed frame, never making a sound. Jim held the lantern close, providing light in the storm-darkened cabin. "Your turn," Samuel said when she finished. Her pants leg was torn and bloody. The stallion's hoof had laid open a 6-inch gash on her calf. Jim whistled low. "That needs stitching too." May started to protest, then saw their faces. "Fine." Samuel insisted on doing it. Though his hands shook, Jim ended up guiding them, the 2 men working together to close the wound while May bit down on a leather strap. When it was done, they sat in exhausted silence. The cabin was full of sand. The barn was half destroyed, and they were all walking wounded. "Thank you," Samuel said quietly to May. "That stallion would have killed me." "You'd have done the same." "That's not the point." He met her eyes, and she saw something there she couldn't quite name. "You didn't have to. You chose to." Jim cleared his throat. "Well, while we're all being grateful, how about we eat something, then we can start figuring out how to fix this mess." They ate cold beans and hard biscuits, too tired to cook, as the sun set, painting the damaged ranch in gold and shadow. May realized something had shifted. Not just the ranch's geography, scrambled by wind and sand, but the relationship between the 3 of them. She wasn't their ward or employee anymore. She was their partner. "We'll need supplies," Jim said, practical as always. "Lumber for the barn, new shingles, fence wire." "I'll ride to Cedar Ridge tomorrow," Samuel said. "You'll do no such thing," May said sharply. "Not with that head wound. I'll go." Both men started to protest. "I'm the least injured," she pointed out. "And it's time I faced that town anyway. Can't hide here forever." "You're not hiding," Samuel said. "You're living." Same difference if I'm too scared to show my face. She stood, testing her weight on the injured leg. It held. I'll take the wagon, get what we need. Jim can start clearing the barn. You rest, Sam, whether you like it or not. When did she get so bossy? Jim asked with a slight smile. About the time she threw herself between me and 600 pounds of angry horse. Samuel replied. That night, May slept in the barn's remaining section with Jim, giving Samuel the cabin and the bed. Her leg throbbed, and every muscle ached from fighting the storm, but she felt more solid than she had in years. Jim snored softly in his bedroll nearby. Through the gaps in the damaged roof, she could see stars appearing as the dust settled. Tomorrow would bring the ride to town, facing the people who'd watched her father beat her, who'd whispered about her living with an Apache and a black man. But tonight, she was May who'd saved the horses, who'd sewn Samuel's wound, who'd earned her place through blood and choice rather than birth and obligation. The storm had torn through their small ranch, leaving destruction in its wake. But like the desert itself, they would adapt, rebuild, survive. A coyote called in the distance that wild, mournful sound that used to frighten her. Now it just seemed like another survivor singing to the stars, declaring itself still alive despite the storm. May touched the bandage on her leg, feeling the neat stitches underneath. Samuel's careful work. Even with a head injury and shaking hands, he'd marked her not with violence, but with care. Each stitch a small promise that she was worth the effort of mending. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was exactly where she chose to be. The ride to Cedar Ridge tested every bit of courage May had built over the past 6 weeks. Each familiar landmark brought memories: the cottonwood where she'd hidden from her father's rage, the creek where she'd washed blood from her clothes, the ridge where she'd first seen the town and thought it meant safety. The wagon was loaded with damaged lumber to trade, 2 horses to sell, and a list of supplies they needed. Samuel had given her money more than she'd ever held wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath the wagon seat. If there's trouble, he'd said that morning, you come straight back. There won't be trouble, she'd replied, though they both knew better. Cedar Ridge looked smaller than she remembered, the same dusty streets, the same weathered buildings, but somehow diminished, like seeing a childhood fear in daylight. She drove the wagon down Main Street, back straight, eyes forward. People stopped to stare. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the general store, mouth open. 2 miners elbowed each other, pointing. May kept driving until she reached Patterson's saloon, where she knew the first confrontation would come. Her father was there, of course, holding court at his usual table, though his audience had shrunk to 2 old drunks who'd listen to anyone for free whiskey. Thomas Sullivan looked up as she entered, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, then something that might have been shame. May. He half rose from his chair. Mr. Sullivan, she said formally. I'm here on business with Mr. Patterson. Mickey Patterson himself stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with unusual intensity. Miss May, heard you were working the Crow Ranch. I am. We need supplies to repair storm damage. I'm hoping to trade some lumber and sell 2 horses. I might know buyers, Mickey said carefully, glancing at Thomas. Her father found his voice. You can't just walk in here like nothing happened. Like what happened? May turned to face him fully. Like you beat me in the street, like you tried to sell me to Garrett Henderson, or like I left of my own free will to work an honest job. You're my daughter. No. The word came out firm and final. I'm May Sullivan. I work for the Crow Washington Ranch. That's all I am to you now. Thomas's drinking companions shifted uncomfortably. One mumbled about needing to leave. The other suddenly found his empty glass fascinating. The whole town's talking, Thomas said, his voice rising. My own daughter, living with good men who pay fair wages and never raise a hand except to help? May pulled out the small ledger she'd brought. Mr. Patterson, Samuel wanted me to show you this. The debt's been paid down to $18. We'll have the rest within the month. Mickey nodded slowly. Sam's always been good for his word. Unlike some, May said, looking directly at her father. The saloon door swung open. Garrett Henderson entered with two friends, rough men who worked as enforcers for various dubious enterprises. Garrett's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Well, the runaway returns. I'm here on business, Mr. Henderson. Nothing to do with you. Everything in this town has to do with me. Girl. He moved closer, his friends flanking him. Your daddy and I still have an arrangement to discuss. Discuss all you want. Doesn't involve me. Garrett reached for her arm. May stepped back, but found herself against the bar. Don't touch me, she said quietly. Or what your Apache isn't here to protect you. I don't need protection. May's hand found the knife at her belt one Jim had given her after the storm. I said don't touch me. Garrett laughed. You pull that knife, girl, and I'll... The saloon door opened again. Deputy Cole entered, followed surprisingly by Mrs. Valdez and 3 of her adult sons. Then came Marcus Freeman with 2 of his ranch hands, Chen from the railroad camp. Even Doc Garrett appeared, medical bag in hand. Heard May Sullivan was in town, Deputy Cole said mildly. Thought I'd make sure everything stayed peaceful. This isn't your business, Cole, Garrett snarled. Public peace is exactly my business. Cole positioned himself between May and Garrett. Miss Sullivan, you were saying something about storm repairs. May found her voice. Yes, the ranch took damage. We need lumber, shingles, nails. My boys can help with that. Mrs. Valdez said, we have extra lumber from our barn raising. I've got shingles. Marcus Freeman added. Good quality. We can work out a fair trade. Garrett's face darkened. You're all making a mistake, supporting this situation. What situation? Chen asked in his quiet voice. A young woman working honest labor. This is America. People work where they choose. She's a minor. For 5 more months, May interrupted. 5 months, Mr. Henderson. Then I'll be 18 and free to make any choice I want, including the choice to never speak to you again. Your father owes me. My father's debts are his own. May pulled out the money Samuel had given her, counting out bills onto the bar. Mr. Patterson, this is for supplies. Whatever's left goes toward the debt. Mickey counted the money, nodded. I'll have everything ready within the hour. May turned to leave, but Thomas grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not violent, but desperate. May, please, you're all I have left. She looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. For a moment, she saw the man he'd been before when Mother was alive, when he'd still had hope instead of whiskey. You had me, she said softly. For 16 years, you had me, but you threw me away every time you raised your fist, every time you chose the bottle over being a father. She pulled free, gently this time. I'm not yours anymore, she continued. I'm not anybody's. I belong to myself now. That Apache's poisoned your mind? No, May's voice carried across the silent saloon. Samuel Crow taught me to read horses and mend fences. Jim Washington taught me to keep books and make medicines. They taught me I was worth teaching. You taught me I was worth hitting. Which lesson do you think poisoned me? Thomas sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. Garrett made one last attempt. This isn't over. May looked him straight in the eye. Yes, it is, because if you come to the ranch again, if you threaten any of us, I'll tell everyone exactly what you offered my father. How much was it, Mr. Henderson? How much did you think I was worth? Garrett's friends shifted uneasily. Even in Cedar Ridge, some things were too ugly for daylight. That's slander. It's truth, and Deputy Cole was there when you discussed your understanding with my father. Weren't you, Deputy? Cole nodded slowly. I recall that conversation. Garrett looked around the saloon. Seeing faces turned against him, even his own friends seemed uncomfortable. Without another word, he stormed out, his men trailing behind. The saloon stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Mrs. Valdez approached May. "You've grown strong, mija." "I was always strong," May replied. "I just needed room to show it." Within an hour, the wagon was loaded with supplies. Marcus Freeman's men helped secure everything, while Chen added a bag of nails for neighborly goodwill. Doc Garrett pulled May aside as she prepared to leave. "I should have done something," he said quietly. "All those times I treated your injuries, I should have—" "You couldn't," May said. "Not then. The law was on his side." "The law was wrong." "The law often is. That's why sometimes we have to make our own justice." She climbed onto the wagon seat. "Take care, Doc." As she drove out of Cedar Ridge, May passed the spot where Samuel had first said, "Enough." The dust had long since settled, but she could still feel the echo of that moment when one man's choice had changed everything. The ride back to the ranch felt shorter than the ride out. The horses knew they were heading home and picked up their pace. May's leg ached from working the brake on the downhills, but she didn't mind. She'd faced the town, faced her father, faced Garrett Henderson, and she'd done it standing on her own feet. The sun was setting when she saw the ranch in the distance. Two figures stood watching from the barn. Samuel tall and still. Jim broad and solid. They didn't run to meet her, didn't make a fuss. They just waited, patient as the desert itself, while she brought the wagon home. "Any trouble?" Samuel asked as she reined up. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Jim grinned. "Told you she'd be fine." "I brought help," May added. "Mrs. Valdez's sons will come tomorrow with extra lumber. Marcus Freeman sending shingles. Even Chen contributed nails." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "The whole town." "Not the whole town, but enough. Enough people who think what we're building here is worth protecting." That night, as they unloaded supplies by lantern light, May told them about the confrontation. Samuel's face darkened when she described Garrett's threats, but he said nothing until she finished. "You stood up to them alone." "I wasn't alone. The town, the good parts of it, stood with me." She paused. "And you were with me, even if you weren't there. What you taught me, what you showed me was possible. That was with me." Jim clasped her shoulder. "You did good, May, real good." Later, as she wrapped her leg with fresh bandages, May thought about her father's words. "You're all I have left." But that wasn't true. He had his pride, his bottle, his excuses. He'd always chosen them over her. She had chosen differently. She had Samuel and Jim, the horses, the ranch, work that mattered. She had Mrs. Valdez calling her mija and Marcus Freeman offering help. She had a place where she could stand straight and speak truth. Tomorrow, they would start rebuilding the barn. The day after, she would turn another page in the ledger, marking down the ranch's slow but steady progress. In 5 months, she would turn 18. But tonight, she was already free. October 15th came with the first real cold of autumn. May woke before dawn, as had become her habit, but this morning felt different. 18. The number sat strange in her mind, legal and final. She found Samuel already at the corral, working with a new mare they'd acquired in trade. 6 months had passed since that day in Cedar Ridge when he'd said, "Enough." The ranch had been rebuilt stronger than before, with help from neighbors who'd become friends. Her father hadn't come near the place since that day in the saloon. "Morning," Samuel said without looking up. "Coffee's ready." May poured herself a cup, noting the small package wrapped in oilcloth sitting on the fence post. "What's that?" "Your birthday present, from Jim and me." Inside was a leather-bound ledger, her name tooled into the cover, and a set of good steel pens. The ledger's first page had writing in Samuel's careful hand, "Partnership Agreement," Equal three-way split of profits. Effective October 15th, 1878. Partners, May's voice came out rough. Equal partners. Jim's already signed. Just needs your mark. May signed with a steady hand, then looked up at Samuel. He was watching her with that quiet intensity she'd come to know well, the look that said more than words ever could. "There's something else," he said. "Something I need to say." Jim emerged from the barn then, took one look at them, and immediately turned around. "Just remembered I need to check the far pasture. Be gone a few hours." When he'd ridden off, Samuel moved closer to May, though still maintaining that careful distance he'd always kept. "You're 18 now, free to go anywhere, do anything." "I know." "So I need to ask, do you want to stay?" May set down her coffee. "Is that really what you're asking?" Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty she'd rarely seen from him. "No." "Then ask what you really mean." He met her eyes. "That first night, I put up a rope, said I wouldn't cross it without permission." "I remember." "I'm asking permission now." May studied him, this man who'd stood between her and harm, who'd taught her strength without ever raising his voice, who'd shown her respect when the world had shown her none. "The rope's been gone for months, Samuel." "Not in my mind. It's always been there, keeping me right where I should be, close enough to help, far enough to let you breathe." May stepped toward him, closing the distance he'd so carefully maintained. "I can breathe just fine now." His hand came up slowly, carefully, to touch her face, the first deliberate contact between them since that handshake months ago. His thumb traced the cheekbone where the last bruise had long since faded. "I'm not an easy man," he said quietly. "I've got Apache blood that makes me unwelcome in most places. Army years that left their own scars, and a ranch that barely keeps us fed. And I'm a woman with her own ghosts, Samuel. But we've been dancing around each other for 6 months. I'm tired of dancing." He kissed her then, gentle as his hands with the horses, certain as his voice had been that day he'd changed her life. When they pulled apart, May saw Jim in the distance, obviously waiting for a signal to return. "He's not subtle," she said with a small laugh. "Never has been." Samuel waved Jim back. "But he's family, like this ranch, like what we've built here." Jim rode up, grinning wide. "About time I've been watching you two circle each other like nervous colts. Thought I'd die of old age before either of you made a move." That evening, neighbors began arriving. Mrs. Valdez with her family, Marcus Freeman and his hands, Chen with mysterious packages that turned out to be fireworks. Even Deputy Cole appeared, badge polished and manner formal. "Heard it was your birthday, Miss Sullivan," he said. "Wanted to pay my respects to the newest legal adult in the county." "Thank you, Deputy." He lowered his voice. "Your father's in the lockup, drunk and disorderly. He won't be bothering anyone tonight." May felt something in her chest, not pain exactly, but the echo of what might have been. "Is he all right?" "He's alive. That's about all anyone can say." Cole tipped his hat. "You made the right choice, leaving. Want you to know that?" As the sun set, they gathered around a bonfire Jim had built. The ranch looked nothing like it had 6 months ago. New barn, stronger fences, more horses in the corrals. But more than that, it felt like something real and permanent. "I want to tell you all something," May said, standing before the assembled group. 6 months ago, Samuel Crow said 2 words that changed my life. He said, "Enough, and she's mine now." But I need you to understand what those words really meant. She looked at Samuel, who stood quiet and watchful at the edge of the firelight. When he said, "She's mine now," he wasn't claiming ownership. He was claiming responsibility. He was saying, "From now on, I stand with her." And that's what he did. He and Jim both. They stood with me until I could stand on my own. May pulled out the ledger, showing the partnership agreement. "Today, I'm not his or anyone's. I'm my own person, making my own choice. And I choose to stay here, to build this ranch, to make a life with people who showed me what family really means." Chen's fireworks lit up the desert sky, reflecting off faces dark and light, young and old, misses. Valdez had brought guitars, and soon music filled the night. May found herself dancing with Jim, who moved with surprising grace for such a large man. "You know Sam's been in love with you since about the second week," Jim said quietly. "I know. And you," May glanced at Samuel, who was talking with Marcus about horse bloodlines, but kept looking her way. "About the same."
Then why wait so long?
"Because I needed to know I was choosing him, not just grabbing the first safety I found. I needed to be whole first." Jim spun her around. "And are you whole?" "Getting there. Later." As the party wound down and guests began leaving, May found herself alone with Samuel by the dying fire. The desert stretched endless around them, stars brilliant in the clear night. "No more nightmares?" he asked. "Sometimes, but they're smaller now. Like you said, telling them to the sun helps." "And your father?" May considered. "He's a chapter that's closed, not forgotten, but finished. I don't hate him. Nothing him. He's not part of my story anymore." Samuel took her hand, their fingers intertwining.
"What is your story now?"
"This," May said simply.
"This ranch, this work, these people, you."
He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the calluses that 6 months of honest work had built. "When I saw you that day in Cedar Ridge, you looked like a wild horse someone had tried to break, but you weren't broken, just trapped." "Not anymore. No, not anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the embers pulse like distant stars. Tomorrow would bring its own workhorses to train, fences to mend, books to balance. There would be challenges, too. Not everyone would accept an Apache man and a white woman building a life together. But tonight, with the ranch settled into sleep around them and the desert singing its ancient songs, none of that mattered.
"I never thanked you properly," May said, "for that day, for saying enough."
"You don't need to thank me. Your life, your strength, your choice to heal instead of harden, that's thanks enough." May stood, pulling him up with her. "Come on. Jim's probably pretending to sleep in the barn, giving us privacy we don't need anymore." As they walked toward the cabin, their cabin now, truly May paused to look back at the road that led to Cedar Ridge. Somewhere down that road, her father was sleeping off another drunk. Garrett Henderson was nursing his grudges. The town was full of people who'd watched her suffer and done nothing. But here, in this valley between ridges, she'd found what they never could have given her. Not rescue, but respect. Not ownership, but partnership. Not someone to hide behind, but someone to stand beside. "May," Samuel's voice was soft in the darkness. "I'm coming." She turned away from the road and toward the cabin, toward the man who'd taught her that love wasn't possession and strength wasn't violence. The October wind carried the scent of sage and coming winter, of changes and challenges ahead. But May Sullivan, partner, horsewoman, survivor, was ready for whatever came next. She was 18 years old, legally free, and more than that, she was herself, complete and unbroken, shaped by hardship but not defined by it. The cabin door closed behind them, shutting out the night. But through the window, the stars kept their watch, and the desert kept its counsel. And somewhere a coyote sang to the moon about freedom and wild things that refused to be tamed. In the morning, there would be coffee at dawn and work until dusk. But tonight, for the first time in her life, May Sullivan was exactly where she wanted to be. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen to stay. She was home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about May's journey. What did this story mean to you?